So, all right, we'll get into it. So, like Brian said, we've got artsy honcho, we've got SC honcho, we've got live honcho, and tech honcho. All right, so staking your claim. So the idea behind this is kind of the land settlement that happened in the States in 1889. And with this ship, it is built to go and settle unknown lands. So before we even thought about this, before we even got into it, there was a couple of prerequisites that we felt needed to be done. First one being procedural planets that you guys have seen. Now, obviously, that creates a huge, massive play area that we need to fill with gameplay, and in essence, we're letting you guys fill it. Then the other thing is that we needed to establish the two ends of the spectrum. So we've got cities that you guys have seen with Area 18, and then we've got outposts, and then in the middle we've got villages, which we'll introduce later. But now that we have outposts, that's basically our campsites. And then procedural building tech. And I think that you guys have seen some of that stuff, and then I'm sure that we'll show you more in the future. So where this ship fits into the game is a mid to long-term ship. It's for building and placing outposts. And like Brian said, we'll go into more detail about it on this panel. And then the thought process behind it is that this is for orgs or for a single player that wants to run AI. Okay.
So I'll quickly talk about the normal process of ship design that we do. We've talked on ATV lots about it. If you've grabbed me around the building, I've talked to you about it. It's usually a pretty linear process. So we get a super simple design brief from a director. Like we get Chris, Ben Lesnick, Todd, Tony. They go, I want this ship to do this. And then we go away, the tech design department, and we expand that to a one-page design brief to make sure we've interpreted what they want correctly. That is high-level stats, so rough dimensions, rough armament, rough speeds, rough size. We have a kickoff meeting based around that with all the directors. They give their buy-in. Then we go away and we do a super simple white box in Engine just to block out the shapes, because it's one thing saying we want a ship to be 50 meters and we want it to do X, Y, Z, but if you can't actually fit those three things in it, there's no point it being 50 meters. So then we quickly validate that. It's either made from solids or we use existing assets from existing ships and just smash them together, which Paul loves to see. Well, it's lovely work, just crushed together. That gets signed off. It goes into concept and tech design go hand in hand, just constantly iterating, gets signed off, and then when it's all signed off, use it. So for the Pioneer, we did it slightly differently. So we had the high-level design brief. We want to have a ship that creates outposts. So, well, okay, that's quite a big bit of gameplay. So we don't know how we're going to do that, or we didn't know how we were going to do that at the time. And then the other really interesting part was we want it to be Consolidated Outlands, which we have the Mustang, and trying to extrapolate that up to the huge scale. It's like, well, all the other manufacturers, we know what little ships look like, big ships. We can't just take a Mustang and go, it's going to be ridiculous. So
we should have.
Well, we could try.
So what we did first, we talked with Nathan Dearsley and Paul. We didn't do a white box for it, which is quite an unusual process. They went away and did all mood boards, concepts of what they want Consolidated Outlands to look like, which Paul will show you some of the early stuff, because it was very clear from that what shape and form the ship would take. There's no point us making boxes if the ship's going to be a round flying disc. It's not going to work. So we got those back, and you can see the round and round bit in the middle where we got the concept. Chris liked it, signed it off, did a white box, went with art. I was like, no, that doesn't work. Round and round we go till everyone was happy, signed off, and that was that. So some quick ship stats. The new ship matrix went live last night at some point. So we've gone through every ship in the game and updated all their stats to the best that we know of. And we're going to keep that more up to date. It's a much simpler process now. Anything you see up there with a dash is because we don't know where it's fully going to be. We'd rather give you the numbers when they're not going to change rather than what we have in the past. So it's like this. Everyone sits on it for 3 years and goes, why is it not like that anymore? We'll give you it when we have some solid numbers. But the numbers we do have there are the ones we do know about. So it's 200 meters long, which is quite big. It's a capital size ship, which if you've read all the shipyard posts we've been doing over the last 2 weeks, explains that. It's got 600 SEU of cargo, which is used for building the bases. A minimum crew of 4 and a max crew of 8. It supports 8 living on it, so you can just about get by doing 4. So it is a team effort to do this stuff. On the next bit is the more detailed breakdown. And this actually didn't change much from the initial brief that we did. Things like thrusters always change as we build the ships out and work out where the best place for them was. And the only bit that actually changed was the turrets. So we went from having 4 manned turrets to having 2 manned turrets and 2 unmanned turrets. And that was, as we were going over the shapes, obviously to get to a manned, or to use a manned turret, you need to get a man to that turret, which in itself creates restrictions on sizes and shapes. By taking that out of the equation, you can have much more interesting shapes and feel, and the person controlling that turret is just sat somewhere in a nice central location to use it. So yeah, that hopefully you can all see on the website now and look in more detail at it. Paul?
You're going to trust me with the clicker? All right, let's go. So this is the art side of the talk. This is a pretty good question to ask. Obviously, John's explained sort of the initial part of the process. It's, you know, the ship's, it's pretty different to what we've had to deal with before. It's been dealt with generally by one of the concept team in the UK, and he's done very well to remain sane throughout this process. So it has been very challenging, but what I'm going to give you now is a sort of high-level process of how we've approached this ship, a little bit of sort of behind the scenes, and then sort of more of an explanation of where we've arrived, how we've arrived, and hopefully you guys will really like it. So this is my favorite new buzzword that I came up with specifically for this talk. So I think these 3 lines basically describe how we sort of approach this ship. And especially with this ship, we basically, it was kind of different to the other ships in the past. So basically this one was very clear, you know, it was utilitarian. It was basically monolithic manufacturing. It's basically, you've got a huge brick of a ship, essentially. But obviously that doesn't look cool. So, you know, we go through various stages to make this look good. So throughout the whole process and throughout the sort of whole design philosophy of the ship, it's basically an asymmetrical design. So you'll see on the exterior it's asymmetrical. The bridge is asymmetrical. It's cantilevered. The corridors are asymmetrical. And this throws, it's basically in the DNA of this ship. And, you know, John has mentioned previously that obviously we've had the Mustang, which is one of our, I guess, really early ships from Consolidated Outlands. And not really a lot of work had been done in terms of the style guide. And really they're more of a separate division. So this is more of your industrial division. So it's kind of like the Reclaimer, which is like the industrial Aegis. So right off the bat, you know that you're dealing with function over form. It's not going to be like super sexy. It's not going to be pretty. But it's still going to have a really good sort of well thought out industrial design feel to it. So even as you're walking through this thing, you're still going to appreciate it, and you've got your own essentially flying factory. So this next slide, this basically sort of shows the sort of initial development. So what normally happens is that we always provide Chris with a series of options. He always, if we give him one, he's never happy. He wants to see 3, 4. The more he can see, the more options, the better. Which is great. We're totally used to it. We know how to work fast. That's you don't really sort of set your heart on anything, but you keep pushing for what you like, ideally. So we provide Chris with all these options of how this ship can look good, but also, not be a flying brick. So basically, there's a lot of transformation. We still have technical issues, well, not technical issues, technical requirements that we need to take into account with this. But at this stage, we hand this off to Chris, and he's able to then give us feedback. He's able to pick from A, pick from B, say, I like the color from J, and then basically we go on to the next round of feedback. So this is where we start sort of dialing in. We've taken what Chris likes, and again, it's just super loose, super rough. We are dealing with mesh work that we're just sort of crashing together. We're not being all precious about this stuff. So we're basically just going for an aesthetic with a hint of the functionality. That's already sort of been factored in with talks with design. And what you'll see here is like in a sort of really, we've got the next few slides are very sort of behind the scenes. There's sort of the stuff that goes on at people's desks, and people are drawing on their Wacoms. And this shows, you can tell this is an early one because this is actually flipped the other way. But you can see really early on that we dialed in to what we wanted for this ship. So you've got the bridge. It's very much like the bridge of an oil tanker. You're overlooking your ship. It's good visibility. You can see your whole manufacturing process, and basics, turrets, and how this is going to work. And again, these are really apologies for the sort of small resolution, but here you can it gives you an indication of the block out process in terms of the animation and the manufacturing process. So this is not a 3D printer. It is a manufacturing plant. So you're essentially you'll be taking your panels, materials, almost like IKEA, dare we say?
I would say more like a car manufacturer or something.
Right.
Like that.
So more like Tesla, let's say. Yeah. I prefer Tesla, and it definitely suits more with the sort of the video you guys have just seen. And so you can see the sort of amount of detail that the concept artist is putting in for the manufacturing plant. And basically you've got 2 arms, and that's basically where everything gets built. And then in the center, it all gets assembled. There's a little bit of magic that goes on in there, and then basically the crane comes in and takes your pods. So this is I guess, final concept model. So we're jumping right ahead in the process. And as you can see, this is it starting to articulate. This is once you've landed and found a suitable landing site. You've got an arm that's articulating out. There is a turret on this arm, and it's also sort of providing an extra sense of perimeter to your base. The area in blue is essentially the crane. And once everything has been assembled, this crane comes in, takes the habitation pods out of there, moves it to the front of the ship, so that then there's still space for additional pods, and depending on how you've configured it. And then again, this is kind of just sort of showing you the process of where the cargo is inserted, and it runs down both arms, ultimately meets in the middle. And you know, as a player, you'll be able to see a ton of this going on. You'll have all the equipment. You'll have all the robot arms. As you're playing it or as you're walking around your base, you should really get a good feel of what's going on. Swiftly moving on. This is just some quick outlines, just sort of outlining the top view, basically, of the bridge. Again, asymmetrical feel, cantilevered design. Inside there you have Habitation, which we'll see examples of after this. Some hefty landing gear, because this is quite a large ship. Additional cargo space, as well as a landing pad, which is above further cargo space, and that landing pad can articulate, move out of the way. Staging area, this is where all your robots are. This is where everything is getting sort of built, essentially, from your materials. And then manufacturing is where all the magic happens. Moving on, these are some of the final images that basically have been built for this ship. So you can see the habitation pod there already. And you can see there's walkways in there, so as a player, you'll be able to come out. I guess if you're in a nice calm situation, you'll be able to come out and see all your cool equipment. If you're in a combat situation, hopefully you'll have more, a good advantage or possibly disadvantage for firefights, depending on if you have people taking over your base. And then this is the bridge. And this is pretty cool. You can see on the sort of far left-hand side, there's a little blue monitor. It actually looks quite small, but that's actually the architect's station. So that's the console, basically, where you're designing your configuration, I guess. So you're choosing 1 pod, 2 pod, 5 pods. Moving on, rather cool engine room. Basically this will be a large open space. Again, asymmetrical from the top. You've got some really interesting turbines that should give us some really cool animation opportunities. And it's very different to anything that we've seen so far in the Star Citizen universe. Habitation. Obviously, you've got space for a couple of big bennies. Everybody wants big bennies in their ship. And then split level room, so space for chilling out, just watching TV or just having dinner with your friends. Bunk room, again, very utilitarian, very basic, down to basics. If you look closely, you can see one crew member in one of the pods just lying down. And this is just a quick slide put together just to give you an indication of comparative sizes. Again, you've got a little Mustang in there, which will fit on the landing pad. And finishing up, this is sort of final rendering of just showing the ship in its full glory. And it's still, even though it is utilitarian and sort of quite big and massive, monolithic, again, with this sort of graphical branding, it's kind of still giving we've broken up the shapes, we've given it a really sort of futuristic feel, and I'm pretty happy with it, yeah.
You want it? Click.
Yeah. So I'm now going to hand over to Tony.
Okay. So before you can actually begin construction of your new outpost, you'll need to first select and purchase a plot of land. The value of that land, what you're going to have to pay in order to acquire it, depends upon a variety of objective criteria, as well as the seller's insight into that information, which we collectively refer to as knowledge. One of the things that we track for each section of land that you can potentially purchase is the resources present and the quantity. Another one is the current market value, which will obviously impact the value of land. If the land has an abundance of a particular mineral that at that particular point in time is exceptionally valuable, then that's going to increase the current value of that land. But it's a very dynamic process. The level of certainty, that's interesting in that knowledge, information within Star Citizen is very often an analog concept. You don't necessarily know something or not know something, but rather you know things to varying degrees. And the easiest way that I could give for an example would be to consider a car that you're thinking about purchasing. If you're being asked to purchase a car and you haven't actually seen it, you're going to be very conservative in terms of your estimate of what it might be worth. If you're able to see it even from the exterior and verify there's tread on the wheels, the paint job looks okay, etc., then that's going to increase your perception of its value. If you're able to actually turn the car on, make sure it's running, or better yet, have a mechanic take a peek under the hood, then that's going to basically bring it even farther up the scale. And so a lot of what we're doing with the value of land, which ties over into the Pioneer, because you're going to be setting up these outposts ideally in optimal locations to exploit a lot of this value that's sitting on the surface of these planets. The next one up would be when the info was last verified. Knowing that there is a vast abundance of gold at a particular area, but the information is stale. It's 2 weeks old, it's a month old, it's 6 weeks old. As it gets more out of date, it becomes less and less valuable. And so what this means is that players will routinely have to refresh the knowledge of a particular area in order to maintain the perceived land value within the game. The last thing that I'd mention in regards to what constitutes knowledge is the value of location. If you've got a field of copper ore and it's in close proximity to a refinery, potentially at an outpost set up by one of these pioneers, then that ore field, the land that what you'd have to pay to actually purchase that land is going to rise in price. If on the other hand there's no refinery on that planet, and you have to basically spend 20 minutes basically carting the ore to another refinery and then getting it to its eventual destination, that's going to lower the perceived value of that plot of land. So knowledge within the game is a really fundamental concept, and knowledge is a concept that once you've acquired it about a certain area or a certain object, you're able to transfer that to other friends, you're able to transfer that to organizations, you're able to sell that information to public information brokers, or freely submit it into the public domain.
So yeah, Tony talks about knowledge, what it all means, but to get that knowledge, you've got to go and find that area to figure out what's there. Is it right for you? And that's where all the exploration ships come in. You could take your Pioneer and do all this with your Pioneer, but it's probably not going to be the best ship for scouting locations. We've got a whole wealth of exploration ships that are designed for finding that information out. It's like you wouldn't take your oil rig out into the ocean and just randomly dot it down until you found what you wanted. They send the scouts out to find the best locations. So the ships we mentioned there's just a small range of the exploration ships, like the 315P, Terrapin, Carrack. All exploration, all have slightly different pros and strengths. So you've got the single ones, you've got the big crews, and they're just there to help find where you want to send your Pioneer to. You might find a nice location, but if you went there in your Pioneer, you're never going to find out where the nearest refinery, like Tony talked about. You could build it and you find it's millions of miles away, and that's going to be a waste. So these exploration ships are really sort of key to finding those places.
Yeah, and one of the things we're aiming to do is make sure that there's a lot of gameplay associated with these high-level concepts. And by that I mean, If you discover, if you're working your long-range scanners, you may find a previously unknown body, an asteroid that no one else within the system knows about, and there is a level of value related to that. If you work your dials a little bit and you've got the proper equipment and the skills, then without actually having to make the journey, you could increase the potential value of that knowledge find by being able to discern, the mass of the object. A large asteroid is going to be, all things, being equal, be worth more than a smaller asteroid. But if you really want to ratchet it up, and this kind of goes back to the degrees of knowledge that I was talking about, if you actually make the journey to it, fly over, burn fuel, burn time, brave whatever dangers are between you and there, and you actually do a flyover of the surface, then you may actually just visually see pools of hydrocarbons, gas venting from the surface. And again, that raises up what you know about it all the more. If you really want to get specific about what's there and maximize the potential value of that find, though, then you're going to have to set down on the surface, and you're actually going to take core samples, and you're going to basically have these processed, analyzed, and you're going to do things like seismographic surveys and have, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of this plays into a common theme that we're trying to execute upon, which is all of these high-level ideas and stuff have a variety of different ways by which the player community can basically attack them, and by which these things will feed the outputs of one into the inputs of another.
So now that Tony's kind of giving you a high-level idea of what land is and how we value it, I'm going to talk about actually claiming your land. So first and foremost, claims are not tied to the Pioneer. A single person, organization can buy them, so on and so forth. Then we have the concept of UEE space, non-UEE space. If you settle in UEE space, you need to have a claim. If you're brave enough and you don't want to do it, you can venture out to non-UEE space, and then there you can find some of your shadier things that you want to do in the game. So if you do plant it in the UEE space, then the idea is that you get the protection from the UEE, in case somebody comes and attacks you and stuff like that. It will be transferable between players. Like any good government, the UEE will actually take a cut of that in a title transfer cost. We're doing general licenses. Later on, the UEE will portion out licenses. So when it comes to actually claiming the beacon or claiming your lands, you'll have a beacon interaction. So you set down your beacon. This is where I want to go. And either yourself, one of your teammates, or a data runner will take this information to the closest UEE colony office, and basically that's when it locks in, and now that land is yours.
Yeah, so one of my favorite aspects about just the overall concept of land is actually speculation. And the basic idea is that assume that you've purchased land and you've gone out and you either bought it with foreknowledge that it likely contained these minerals, et cetera, or you discovered that yourself. And so now you're holding on to this land, and the decision you'll face is, well, do I basically extract that value right now? If whatever that land contains is currently in a bear market, it's not worth very much, then you may elect to basically wait to harvest whatever it holds until those particular commodities have price. And it sounds simple, but there's a lot of ripple effects to where we get really interesting knock-on gameplay effects. And by this I mean, when you own land, that doesn't prevent someone else from necessarily going in there and extracting those resources. Now, obviously, if you're doing this within UEE space and you basically sit down and you're extracting resources from someone else's property, then that's a criminal offense, and basically the game's security system will deal with them as appropriate. But, of course, the police aren't patrolling, every square inch of every planet, every asteroid, every moon, every minute of the day. And so you holding onto that property, waiting for, a better payday in the future, has real implications in terms of, well, in addition to relying upon the system security, do you want to put your own sensors there so that you're alerted when someone else does something that you don't like on that area of land? So if somebody starts mining, you'll basically be notified, and then you and potentially your org mates can head out there and basically push them off. You may hire mercenaries to basically periodically patrol your land with a higher level of frequency than what the normal, the normal UE security forces would do. Basically, the equivalent of hiring your own personal security to, to keep watch, of your valuables. And I'm really just touching the surface here. I mean, another thing is it makes the point that you don't necessarily have to do the full end-to-end cycle in order to take advantage of this. You could, for example, buy land or discover land and then just flip the land after you've verified that it's got this, as opposed to you necessarily exploiting, mining, pulling up all of that material, which is a very particular type of gameplay that some people will love, but for other people, the discovery aspect or the security aspect, or on and on, if you have an interest in only one section of these areas, then you can still contribute to the overall equation. If you want to basically handle everything yourself, you can also do that.
Okay. So solely towards the Pioneer, and what I'm going to talk about is preparation. So first thing that you're going to do is you're going to need to do collect materials and add-ons from different stores. So you'll get materials from TDDs or refineries, and you'll be able to pick up some of the add-ons like Tony was talking about, remote sensors or extractors, solar panels, moisture extractors, geothermal pumps, landing pads, turrets, that kind of stuff. Now, what is very important to understand is, if any of you have ever done home projects, know what you're building, so that you don't do 5 trips to Hornbach to build something. So if you know what you're building, and then you know the resources that you'll save yourself multiple trips, or it will be one of those things where you'll need to have these resources brought to you. So what do you want from your outpost? What's your gameplay intent? Do you want to be a moisture farmer and live and respawn there and basically look out over this beautiful beach, or do you want it to be like a revenue generator? So basically, you'll swoop in, you'll watch over it, you'll check in, make sure everything's running smoothly, move on to your next thing. So with this, we've got investment, not only from a resource and basically game money standpoint, at time to build. Not as fast as Paul's videos. So the other thing is, depending on the size of it, that will increase the build time the higher you go. Now, once it's actually placed, you're going to want to upkeep it. Depending on if you put something in Earth's atmosphere versus the Mars's atmosphere versus Venus, well, those are all different climates. And so the wear and tear and just kind of the usual stuff that we're doing with the ships, and as far as stuff breaking down, so on and so forth, this will be the same. So configuring. Now, the idea would be that you're working the architect station, you're choosing the exterior layout of it, and then from there, you'll move into the interior rooms. So some of the different interior options: habitation, armory, storage, Medstation, mining, refining, hydroponics. And so with this, depending on what you're doing, each one of them is going to require a different amount of power. And then that starts going into some of the add-ons. So if you're mining, or if you're doing something that's very, very power intensive, growing things, so on and so forth, then you're going to need to run extra power in there. And with the add-ons, just like with our ships, if you think of our ships as the base hull, and then you have your gimbals, you have your mounts, and then you're attaching weapons, you're attaching ordnance, you're attaching utility items. It's the same idea here. It's basically you have your base structure, and then you have these item ports, like Chris always talks about, that will feed into the ore extractors, and that's how we generate the power. So here are just some of the internal shots. I think you guys have seen some of these already. I like the salad spinner, hydroponics, different mining ideas, storage. So one of the important things is basically if you're growing plants, or if you're basically dealing with any sort of bare form resources that will feed into our ecological system, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're actually storing these items, and so that you're not just mining once and then basically having to shut down because you don't have any more space. Drug lab. So in case you want to do a little Breaking Bad. Then idea about research, and this would be maybe you're close to the sun or something like that, and you want to research some solar flares or those types of things. Medstation. So the main thing for us has always been a sandbox, and making sure that you have the freedom to focus on the gameplay that you find interesting. And so what we wanted to talk about was just some of the ecosystems that we feel these things help support and help build. You've got the haulers and traders that would be dealing with things that would come in, and if you're mining or if you're growing plants, well, these are going to take these to manufacturing or processing centers. Tony mentioned the security and the needing to actually protect your things, because I can guarantee you, if you're making money, people are going to want to take it from you. Exploration, John mentioned this about going and finding these plots of land and everything like that. Then there's repair, obviously mining, farming, and the refining stuff. So that is our panel. Brian.
Here are we used to people finishing on time? Probably.
Oh yeah, we actually finished early.
We chopped up.
Do you want to?
That's fine.
Okay.
Are you kidding?
Okay.
Yeah, here I am. Awesome, thank you. We have time for a few questions, not the normal length, just because we need a little bit of prep time before Chris gives his large presentation.
The other thing is that I think some of us will be talking to Jared afterwards, and
Absolutely.
then the other thing is that some of us will also make sure that we're out by any extra questions that we need to answer.
Would that be the Intel Saber Raven?
Yes, it would be.
All right, so where's my mics in the audience for questions?
Good show of hands.
Materials required looks quite small for such a big ship. Is it possible to land a freelancer or something, or do you have to ask for like 200 ships to bring you one crate after another?
So it fits 40 by 40 meters. So there's quite a large, it looks quite small on it, but 40 by 40 meters is a lot of space. That's what we deem safe. You can, like with all things cargo, you can push it and get a little bit more on there, but 40 by 40 is the designated area. So there's a lot of cargo options in there, and it is right next to the cargo bay. It slides next to it, so you wheel it out, put it in the cargo bay, and back in again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Over on this side.
Will the outpost be salvageable?
I want them to be.
I want to as well.
Well, to me, it's basically like cleaning up extra stuff. So if somebody wants to burn it, and then you go in and you salvage it, I think that should be doable.
And so sorry, I know there's a lot of hands, but our last one.
Will you be able to spawn at the Medstations?
That's the goal, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to ask, just because I prepped this one ahead of time, because I know the answer and I like the answer. So, what ship does the Pioneer fit in?
Doesn't fit in any.
It doesn't fit in any. And what ship fits in the Pioneer?
No ships fit in the Pioneer. It's just a landing pad on top, not a hangar.
Thank you.